Wananosaurus.
Wananosaurus was a plant-eating pachycephalosaur dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period. It is one of the smallest dinosaurs we know of.
Xenotarsosaurus.
Xenotarsosaurus was a theropod that lived in South America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Xenotarsosaurus probably hunted small dinosaurs and other small animals. Xenotarsosaurus had 4-fingered hands and 3-toed feet. Yangchuanosaurus.
Yangchuanosaurus was a theropod dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Jurassic time period. With plenty of sharp teeth in their jaws, these big carnivores would have been amazing predators.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Yangchuanosaurus probably hunted plant-eating dinosaurs like stegosaurs and young sauropods. Some Yangchuanosaurus grew to be over 30 feet long. With plenty of sharp teeth in their jaws, these big carnivores would have been great predators. Zhejiangopterus.
Like its close cousin, Quetzalcoatlus, Zhejiangopterus was a giant flying reptile or pterosaur. But the fossils of Quetzalcoatlus are known only from North America, and Zhejiangopterus bones are only known from Asia.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Like other pterosaurs, Zhejiangopterus dove into the water and caught fish. While unlike other pterosaurs, Zhejiangopterus did not have a crest or upright bone structure on the back of its head. It was larger than most pterosaurs, with a wingspan of over 16 feet wide. Zygongosaurus. Click to print a collector's card. Zhejiangopterus. Zygongosaurus.
Zygongosaurus was a sauropod dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Jurassic time period.
This animal was about 5 kids tall. Zygongosaurus was a large plant-eating sauropod, a herbivore. Even though it grew up to 50 feet in length, Zygongosaurus was only medium-sized for a sauropod. Zupasaurus. This animal was about 2 kids tall. Zupasaurus was a carnivore, or meat eater. Zupasaurus was around 13 feet long and weighed 500 pounds, making it a fairly large theropod for its time period. Most other theropods of the late Triassic period were around the size of modern-day chickens. Atticus.
This large turtle had a smooth shell. It was probably a good swimmer that lived most of its life in the water.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Atticus most likely ate plants, but may have also fed on small animals. Like modern turtles, Atticus were turtles that could pull their heads into their shells. Alamosaurus.
Alamosaurus was a huge, long-necked sauropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 7 kids tall. Alamosaurus was a plant-eating sauropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period. Alamosaurus was a huge, long-necked dinosaur. It was one of the last sauropods that lived in the Mesozoic era. Allosaurus.
This big meat-eater from the Jurassic of North America had a small horn over each eye. The horns may have helped Allosaurus to recognize others of its kind.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Allosaurus was one of the dominant carnivores in North America that lived in the Jurassic, many millions of years before Tyrannosaurus rex. Allosaurus is the state fossil of Utah. The Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry in central eastern Utah preserves remains of dozens of allosaurs. Amargasaurus.
Amargasaurus was a giant sauropod with 2 rows of spines down its back. The spines may have been attached to one another by skin, creating the appearance of a huge sail on the back of this dinosaur.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Amargasaurus was a sauropod. Sauropods were 4-legged herbivores known for their small heads, big long bodies, and large appetites. While Amargasaurus looked like other sauropods with its long neck and small head, it was very unique. It had 2 rows of tall spines down its neck and back. Ankylosaurus.
Ankylosaurus was covered from head to toe in bony armor. The bony club at the end of its tail may have been used as a weapon to fend off attacking predators like Tyrannosaurus.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Ankylosaurus was a large and heavy quadruped, which means it walked on 4 legs. It was also a herbivore, which means it only ate the green stuff, plants. The body of the Ankylosaurus was covered in bony knobs and plates called osteoderms that functioned like armor for protection against predators. Apatosaurus.
Apatosaurus was a giant sauropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Jurassic time period.
This animal was about 7 kids tall. Apatosaurus had chisel-like teeth located in the front of its jaws, which it used to grab plant food. A lot of plant food. Apatosaurus was a sauropod dinosaur that lived in the Jurassic time period. Archaeopteryx.
Archaeopteryx was a carnivore from the Jurassic period, and it's the oldest known bird. Like modern birds, it had feathers and lightweight bones, but like dinosaurs, it had teeth and a long bony tail.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Archaeopteryx was about the size of a modern-day crow and likely fed on a diet of small animals, including fish and insects. Archaeopteryx, sometimes called first bird, was a small meat-eating dinosaur that lived in the late Jurassic time period. Archelon.
Archelon was a giant sea turtle that lived during the Cretaceous time period. Growing up to 13 feet long and 16 feet wide, Archelon is the biggest turtle known.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Like giant sea turtles today, Archelon may have fed on jellyfish. Growing up to 13 feet long and 16 feet wide, Archelon is the biggest turtle we know of. Argentinosaurus.
This dinosaur was gigantic. It was bigger than 10 Tyrannosaurus put together.
This animal was about 9 kids tall. Argentinosaurus is the largest plant-eating dinosaur ever discovered from the late Cretaceous time period. It was found in Argentina, South America. This dinosaur reached 130 feet long and weighed up to 100 tons. A single vertebrae of Argentinosaurus was the size of a refrigerator. Avosaurus.
Avosaurus was a bird that lived alongside giant dinosaurs in the Cretaceous. It belongs to a group of ancient birds called enantiornithines.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. This flying dinosaur was probably a carnivore, eating small animals like lizards and mammals. Avosaurus were birds with 3-toed feet that were part of the group of mammals called theropods. Beelzebufo. Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Beelzebufo was a carnivore that ate relatively large prey, such as lizards, mammals, and perhaps even small dinosaurs. Unlike many modern frogs that catch their prey with long, sticky tongues, Beelzebufo used a sit-and-wait tactic to hunt for its prey. Beelzebufo would wait for its prey to pass by and grab it with its large, powerful jaws. Brachiosaurus.
This animal had longer front limbs than hind limbs. Many paleontologists think that it held its neck up straight, like a modern giraffe, to reach leaves high up in the trees.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Brachiosaurus, like other plant-eating animals, had broad teeth that would have been great for stripping vegetation off trees.
Brachiosaurus, like other plant-eating animals, had broad teeth that would have been great for stripping vegetation off trees.
Carcharodontosaurus. This animal was about 4 kids tall. Carcharodontosaurus was a carnivore and probably fed on both small and large dinosaurs. Carcharodontosaurus and Tyrannosaurus rex were approximately the same length. However, T-Rex likely weighed 4 to 5 tons more. T-Rex also had a significantly larger brain than Carcharodontosaurus. Castrocauda. Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Castrocauda was an omnivore. It mostly ate meat, but likely ate plants as well. Despite its similarity to modern beavers and otters, Castrocauda did not have teeth for chopping down trees, nor did it likely build dams. Rather, it appears to have been a fish eater with a digging habit. Their front limbs were enlarged with indications of strong muscles, suggesting that it used these limbs for digging. Chirostenodes.
Chirostenodes was a feathered dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous. Its name means narrow hand because it had 3 long, clawed fingers on each hand.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Chirostenodes was an omnivore, which means they ate both meat and plants, just like many humans. They ate plants, eggs, small animals, and insects. Chirostenodes had a beak, a lot like a big bird without teeth. They also had long arms with powerful claws that probably helped them catch prey and pick plants for food. Chirostenodes had a beak, a lot like a big bird without teeth. They also had long arms with powerful claws that probably helped them catch prey and pick plants for food. Similestes.
This early mammal appeared in the Cretaceous period. It was only 8 inches long, about the size of a rat, which is typical of Mesozoic mammals. Similestes probably lived in trees.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. The name Similestes means bug thief, as they likely fed on bugs and insects. Similestes was an early mammal that lived in the woodlands of North America and Africa during the Cretaceous time period. Confuciusaurus.
Confuciusaurus was a crow-sized bird that lived during the Cretaceous. It had a toothless beak and a very long tail of feathers that may have been colorful during life.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Confuciusaurus were herbivores, surviving on plants, nuts, and berries. Scientists believe this based on the fact that Confuciusaurus did not have teeth in their beaks. Confuciusaurus was a crow-sized bird with a toothless beak and a very long tail of feathers. Corythosaurus.
This dinosaur had a crest on its head that may have been used to hoot and toot to communicate with other Corythosaurus.
This animal was about 7 kids tall. Corythosaurus was a herbivore, and like other hadrosaurs or duck-billed dinosaurs, it had a beak with hundreds of small, flat teeth in the back, perfect for grinding up plants. Corythosaurus walked primarily on 2 legs, but scientists think they may have used all 4 legs when eating low plants on the ground. Cretoxyrhina.
This large Cretaceous shark grew up to 24 feet long, about the size of modern great white sharks.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Cretoxyrhina ate large bony fish and occasionally fed on giant reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. Its teeth have been found embedded in the bones of other animals. The age of dinosaurs included some truly giant animals, most of which are gone today. The great white shark is a descendant of Cretoxyrhina and can give clues to what it may have looked like. Cryolophosaurus.
This crested dinosaur was discovered on the southern continent of Antarctica. Today, Antarctica is extremely cold and icy, but during the age of dinosaurs, Antarctica was a much warmer place with lush green forests.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Cryolophosaurus was a large meat-eating dinosaur that lived during the Jurassic time period. During the Jurassic, Antarctica was closer to the equator and was part of a large continent called Pangaea. Cryolophosaurus had an odd bony crest on its head that looked like a funny hairdo. Scientists nicknamed this dinosaur Allosaurus because his furrowed crest resembled the hairdo of Elvis Presley. Daspletosaurus.
Daspletosaurus lived in North America during the Cretaceous. It's closely related to its much larger cousin, Tyrannosaurus.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Daspletosaurus was a meat-eating tyrannosaur. Like T-Rex, it too was the top predator of its time, though it lived long before Tyrannosaurus Rex. Recent research shows that Daspletosaurus and other tyrannosaurs grew quite slowly when small, then went through a major growth spurt in their teen years. Deinonychus.
Deinonychus was a feathered dinosaur about 4 feet tall, just about your size. It was a pretty fast runner with a large curved claw on the second toe of each foot. This terrible claw may have been used to help kill its prey.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Deinonychus were carnivorous predators. Their skulls had powerful jaws lined with almost 60 sharp blade-like teeth. These teeth and their big toe claws were useful for hunting and eating prey. Deinonychus was a feathered dinosaur that was about 11 feet long. Deinosuchus.
Deinosuchus was a giant crocodile that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period. It is one of the biggest crocodiles that have ever lived, growing up to 40 feet long and weighing more than 8 tons.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Deinosuchus probably hunted a variety of animals, including turtles, fish, and even dinosaurs. Deinosuchus and all other crocodiles are reptiles, but they aren't dinosaurs. In fact, birds are the closest relatives of dinosaurs living today. Dilophosaurus.
Dilophosaurus was a theropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Jurassic time period. It had a pair of thin, bony crests on the top of its head that were probably used for showing off to other Dilophosaurus.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Dilophosaurus was likely a great hunter, but like most carnivores, it was probably a scavenger too, eating meat from animals that it did not kill. Dilophosaurus had a pair of thin, bony crests on the top of its head that was probably used for showing off to other Dilophosaurus. Dimetrodon. This animal was about 2 kids tall. Dimetrodon was a carnivore that probably ate insects and small animals. Although Dimetrodon looks like a dinosaur in many ways, it isn't a dinosaur at all. In fact, it's more closely related to mammals like dogs, cats, or even humans like you. Diplodocus.
Diplodocus was a sauropod that lived in North America during the Jurassic time period. It had one of the longest necks of any dinosaur.
This animal was about 7 kids tall. Rather than reaching up high in the trees like a giraffe, this sauropod probably held its neck out nearly straight, eating plants closer to the ground. Diplodocus was a sauropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Jurassic time period. Ephygia. compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Ephygia had a beak and no teeth, making it hard to tell what it ate. Ephygia had large eyes, a long neck, small hands, a long tail, and a beak, while also walking on its hind legs, making them resemble many ostrich-like dinosaurs, such as ornithomimids. Ionosaurus.
Like Triceratops, Ionosaurus is a horned dinosaur. It had a large forward curving horn over the nose and a pair of big spikes pointing backward from its bony frill.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Ionosaurus was a large quadrupedal plant-eating dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period. Adult Ionosaurus had a large forward curving horn over the nose, a small horn over each eye, and a pair of large spikes projecting rearward from their big bony frill on the back of their head. Elasmosaurus.
This giant predator lived in the Cretaceous seas. It wasn't a dinosaur, but instead belongs to a group of reptiles called plesiosaurs.
This animal was about 5 kids tall. Elasmosaurus had sharp teeth and a strong bite. It ate fish and other sea animals. Elasmosaurus most likely gave birth to its young live, like modern-day dolphins or whales. Enantiornithine.
Enantiornithines were among the most common birds during the age of dinosaurs. Some were as small as sparrows, and others were as big as turkeys. Unlike modern birds, most enantiornithines had teeth.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Enantiornithines were omnivores that thrived on a variety of available berries, fruit, bugs, and meat. Enantiornithine fossils indicate that they had long tails like that of modern birds. Many scientists believe that this helped them fan and create lift as they flew. Eoraptor.
Eoraptor lived during the Triassic period, and it's one of the oldest known dinosaurs. It belongs to a group of dinosaurs called theropods, which also includes Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Eoraptor were about 3 feet tall and weighed about 20 pounds. Standing on their 2 hind legs and 3-toed feet, they were very fast runners, which helped them catch prey. Eoraptor's hands had 5 digit-like fingers. The 3 middle digits were the longest and had large claws that were helpful in handling prey. Euoplocephalus.
This tank-like dinosaur was covered in bony armor, with a club at the end of its tail that was also made of bone. This armor was probably used to defend the animal against meat-eating tyrannosaurs.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Euoplocephalus was a plant-eating dinosaur that lived in the Cretaceous time period. It was a smaller version of its armor-plated relative, Ankylosaurus. Euoplocephalus had armor plating and spikes, with a club-like tail that might have been used for defense. It is the first ankylosaur that had armored eyelids that slid over its eyes for protection. Fabrosaurus.
Fabrosaurus was a small plant-eating dinosaur that lived in Africa during the Jurassic time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Fabrosaurus was a plant eater, or herbivore. Like many other dinosaur herbivores, Fabrosaurus had a beak up front for grabbing plants and teeth behind for slicing them up. Fruitifossor. Let's compare it to something we know the size of. Fruitifossor was an insectivore and probably fed mostly on insects like termites and cockroaches. Fruitifossor was a chipmunk-sized mammal from the late Jurassic that resembled a modern-day armadillo or anteater. Like those animals, Fruitifossor probably fed mostly on insects like termites and cockroaches. Gallimimus.
Gallimimus is a theropod dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period. It looks a lot like an ostrich and was a very fast runner.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Paleontologists aren't sure what Gallimimus ate. Some think they were herbivores, feeding only on plants. Others think they were omnivores, eating small animals and plants. Just like ostriches, Gallimimus were fast runners. Giganotosaurus.
Giganotosaurus is one of the largest known meat-eating dinosaurs, more than 40 feet long. This Cretaceous giant is known only from Argentina in South America.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Giganotosaurus were huge carnivores that lived during the late Cretaceous time period. Fossils of Giganotosaurus have been found. Giganotosaurus were bipedal. Glyptops. Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. Glyptops was an omnivore. It ate plants, insects, and fish. Much like many modern turtles, Glyptops used its ornamented shell for protection. The shell is also the most common part of the turtle to be found as a fossil. Goniopholis. Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. Goniopholis was an omnivore that ate plants and small animals. Goniopholis was a relatively small predator for the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods that it lived in, so it was forced to eat plants and small animals rather than other large predators. Hadrosaurus.
Hadrosaurus was a duck-billed hadrosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Hadrosaurus was a plant eater, or herbivore. Hadrosaurus was a duck-billed hadrosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period. Haplocaris. Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. Haplocaris was a carnivore, or meat eater. Haplocaris is the largest known member of a dinosaur group called Alvarezsaurs. It is also the oldest known member of this group, dating back to the late Jurassic period, around 63 million years before any other known Alvarezsaurs. Hesperornis.
Hesperornis was a Cretaceous bird, but it didn't fly. Instead, it lived in the water and was an expert diver and swimmer, like penguins. Penguins, however, use their flipper-like.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. Hesperornis had teeth in their beak, which scientists believe helped them catch and eat fish. Hesperornis had very flexible feet and toes, which helped propel and slow them down while swimming underwater. Iguanodon.
Iguanodon was a large plant-eating dinosaur that lived in Europe during the Cretaceous. It was the first dinosaur ever discovered.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Iguanodon was a large plant-eating dinosaur. One of the first dinosaurs discovered, Iguanodon was a large dinosaur that lived in Europe during the early part of the Cretaceous time period. Jaxartosaurus.
Jaxartosaurus was a duck-billed hadrosaur that lived in Europe during the Cretaceous time period. Its big, helmet-like crest was probably used for showing off and communicating with other Jaxartosaurus.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Like other hadrosaurs, Jaxartosaurus ate plants. Jaxartosaurus is closely related to other crested hadrosaurs, like Corythosaurus and Parasaurolophus. Jahalornis.
Jahalornis was a bird with a long bony tail that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Unlike birds living today, Jahalornis had teeth and may have been a seed eater. Like all birds, Jahalornis was a theropod dinosaur. Kentrosaurus.
This small dinosaur lived in Africa during the Jurassic. Like its cousin, Stegosaurus, Kentrosaurus had plates and spikes running down the length of its back. But Kentrosaurus had fewer plates and a lot more spikes, including a large spike over each shoulder that may have been used to defend itself.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Kentrosaurus was a slow-moving plant eater that was found in Africa. Kentrosaurus had a tiny brain, one of the smallest known for a dinosaur. Kentrosaurus was a relatively small armored stegosaur dinosaur from the late Jurassic time period. Cosmoceratops.
Cosmoceratops was a horned dinosaur, or ceratopsian, that lived during the Cretaceous time period. It had the most ornate skull of any known dinosaur, with large horns above its eyes that pointed to the side, and 10 smaller horns across the back of its bony frill.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Like other ceratopsians, Cosmoceratops was a herbivore. Cosmoceratops belongs to the same group of dinosaurs as Triceratops and Inosaurus. Lambeosaurus.
This duck-billed dinosaur had a hollow head crest made of bone. The crest was probably used to make sounds, so that Lambeosaurus could communicate with others of its kind.
This animal was about 7 kids tall. This herbivore probably stood on its hind legs while reaching into the conifer trees to munch on pine cones and pine needles. Lambeosaurus is a duck-billed dinosaur with a hollow head crest made of bone. The crest was probably used to make sounds for communicating with other Lambeosaurus. Lizotosaurus.
This small Jurassic dinosaur was about 3 feet long, probably shorter than you, and it had long legs and can run fast to get away from predators.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Like many other plant-eating dinosaurs, Lizotosaurus had a beak in the front of its mouth and back teeth that were used to slice up plants. Lizotosaurus had small serrated and pointed front teeth along the jaw that looked like arrowheads and were well suited for chewing plants. Its head was small with large eye sockets. Maiasaura.
This duck-billed dinosaur was named the Good Mother because some paleontologists think that it looked after its babies when they hatched. Maiasaura lived in large groups or herds for protection against predators.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Maiasaura was a large plant-eating dinosaur that lived in North America during the late Cretaceous time period. Scientists have discovered bones of juvenile and adult Maiasaura together in the same site. This suggests they traveled in herds to protect their young and nested in colonies. Michelinoceras.
This small dinosaur, known only from the island of Madagascar, was the size of a big dog. It had strange jaws with long, forward-pointing teeth up front and lots of smaller teeth in back.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. The lower front teeth of Michelinoceras pointed forward and slightly up rather than straight up, like in other dinosaurs. It likely survived on a diet of small animals, fish, birds, lizards, and snakes. Michelinoceras was a small, buck-toothed carnivore that lived during the late Cretaceous time period. It had a long neck and tail, walked on 2 feet, and weighed as much as a German shepherd. Megalosaurus.
Megalosaurus was a giant theropod dinosaur that lived in Europe during the Jurassic time period. Its name means great lizard.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. This big carnivore probably hunted a variety of plant-eating dinosaurs. Megalosaurus lived in what is now present-day Europe. Megaraptor.
Megaraptor was a big theropod dinosaur that lived in South America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Megaraptor was a large, meat-eating theropod. Like other theropods, Megaraptor had 3-toed feet and huge jaws lined with sharp teeth. Michelinoceras.
Michelinoceras was an ancient cephalopod, a close relative of squids that had many arms or tentacles.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Michelinoceras was a carnivore, perhaps diving to great depths to feed on other sea animals. Michelinoceras was an ancient squid-like nautiloid that lived before and long after the dinosaurs were extinct. It lived in the Triassic seas, where it was a major predator. Microraptor.
This tiny feathered dinosaur had 4 wings, one on each of its front limbs and back limbs. However, it couldn't fly. Instead, it probably used its wings to glide from tree to tree, like a flying squirrel. The feathers may also have kept Microraptor warm.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. This Cretaceous carnivore may have lived mostly in the trees, using its sharp teeth to feed on small animals and even insects. One of the smallest dinosaurs ever to be discovered. Microraptors were only between 1 and 3 feet long and weighed less than 3 pounds. Mosasaurus.
Mosasaurus was a huge, meat-eating marine reptile that lived during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Mosasaurus probably ate a variety of animals such as fish, turtles, ammonites, maybe even smaller mosasaurs. Mosasaurus was a meat-eating marine reptile that lived during the Cretaceous time period. Nodosaurus.
Nodosaurus was a plant-eating armored dinosaur, or ankylosaur, that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Nodosaurus was a herbivore. eating plants that grew close to the ground. Nodosaurus moved around slowly on 4 legs. Unable to run away from predators, it probably used its bony armor for protection. Ophthalmosaurus.
Ophthalmosaurus was a marine reptile that lived in the Jurassic time period. It belongs to a group of carnivores called ichthyosaurs, which look a lot like dolphins.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Ophthalmosaurus probably ate a variety of animals like fish and squid. Ophthalmosaurus had a streamlined body that helped it swim fast, maybe up to 40 miles per hour. Ornithomimus.
This dinosaur could outrun most dinosaurs, making it hard to catch. It could probably run at least 25 miles per hour, faster than the fastest humans.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Scientists think that Ornithomimus was most likely an omnivore. Ornithomimus, with its small head, long neck, and long, powerful legs, looked like an ostrich with a long tail. Oryctodromeus.
This small dinosaur used its arms and snout to dig burrows, raising its young in these underground shelters. Burrows provided protection from predators as well as from extreme hot and cold weather.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Oryctodromeus was a fast-running herbivore. Oryctodromeus was a bipedal herbivore that lived in the Cretaceous time period. Scientists discovered this dinosaur in a burrow, which was something never before associated with dinosaurs. Oviraptor.
Oviraptor was a feathered theropod dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Oviraptor probably fed on a variety of small animals, and some paleontologists think it ate plants too. After making a nest and laying a clutch of eggs, Oviraptors sat on their nests just like many birds do, using their body heat and insulating feathers to keep the eggs warm. Pachycephalosaurus.
Pachycephalosaurus was a dome-headed pachycephalosaur dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Pachycephalosaurus was a plant eater, or herbivore. Growing up to 20 feet long, Pachycephalosaurus was a 2-legged herbivore, walking on its hind limbs. Paleobatrachus.
Paleobatrachus was a large frog that lived in the water. By comparing the bones of this ancient frog to those of frogs living today, paleontologists think that it could hold its breath for a long time.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Paleobatrachus were carnivores. They mainly feasted on small fish and bugs, using their long, sticky tongue to catch prey as they went past. Paleobatrachus was a large frog that lived in the water. By comparing the bones of this ancient frog to those frogs living today, scientists think it can hold its breath for a long time. Parasaurolophus.
Parasaurolophus is a duck-billed dinosaur that lived during the Cretaceous. It had a large tube-like crest on its head that may have been used for making deep sounds. Some scientists think that these sounds allowed Parasaurolophus to communicate over large distances.
This animal was about 6 kids tall. Parasaurolophus was a plant-eating duck-billed dinosaur that lived in western North America during the late Cretaceous. Parasaurolophus is one of the rarer duckbills, with a large elaborate crest on its head that functioned as a visual recognition of its species. Patinosaurus.
Patinosaurus was a flying reptile that lived during the Triassic. But it wasn't a dinosaur. It was a small flying reptile called a pterosaur that was about the size of many bats.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. The fossils found indicate that it had very lightweight bones and single cusp teeth, which it used to chew bugs. Patinosaurus lived in the late Triassic time period and are known to have lived in what is now Italy. Pliosaurus.
Pliosaurus was a huge reptile that lived in the Jurassic seas. Although it wasn't a dinosaur, it was one of the biggest carnivores around, measuring up to 40 feet long. Pliosaurus had 4 large flippers and a long head.
This animal was about 6 kids tall. This giant predator probably hunted and ate many different kinds of animals, including fish, squid, ammonites, and other seagoing reptiles. Pliosaurus had a streamlined head and 4 flippers for navigating through the water. It cruised slowly through the water using only 2 flippers and 4 when it needed to hunt quickly for prey. Polycotylus. This animal was about 2 kids tall. Polycotylus was a carnivore that ate fish. Newborn Polycotylus babies were huge. In fact, they were almost half the size of their mother at birth. Proganachellus.
Proganachelles was a turtle that lived way back in the Triassic period alongside the first dinosaurs. It had bony armor over much of its body and even a club on the end of its tail, kind of like the armored dinosaur Ankylosaurus.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. This ancient turtle lived on land most of the time and probably fed on a variety of plants. Similar to today's turtles, Proganachellus had bony shells and toothless beaks. Unlike today's turtles, their heads could not pull into their shells, and they had spikes on their tails for defense. Protoceratops.
Protoceratops was a ceratopsian dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. Protoceratops was a plant-eating herbivore. Protoceratops grew to about 6 feet long. It had an oversized head with a large bony frill that was probably used to show off to other Protoceratops. Protopteryx. Let's compare it to something we know the size of. A kid like you. Protopteryx was a carnivore or meat eater. Protopteryx is the most primitive known enantiornithine. It has 3 types of feathers: downy feathers for warmth, feathers on the wings for flying, and odd scaly central tail feathers. Pteranodon.
This animal wasn't a dinosaur at all. It was a pterosaur, part of a group of flying reptiles that were close relatives of the dinosaurs. It didn't have teeth, but probably loved to eat fish.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. This fish-eating flying reptile was one of the largest pterosaurs to ever live. It had a wingspan of up to 30 feet, which is about the length of a school bus. Pteranodon fossils have been found in marine rocks, which suggests that the animal spent much time gliding over the ocean waters searching for fish. Pterodaustro. Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Pterodaustro was probably a carnivore, eating different kinds of crustaceans like crab, shrimp, lobsters, and crayfish. Pterodaustro's mouth was full of around 1,000 long, bristle-like teeth on its lower jaw, which aided in its filter feeding, and small round teeth on its upper jaw for mashing up the crunchy crustaceans that it liked to eat.
Telodus was a small mammal that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Telodus was an omnivore, living on a diet of fruits, nuts, and bugs. Telodus was about the size of a squirrel and was probably a great tree climber, just like squirrels are today. Quantosaurus.
Quantosaurus was a small, two-legged, plant-eating dinosaur that lived in Australia during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Quantosaurus was a plant-eater, or herbivore. Living close to the South Pole, the large eyes of the Quantosaurus may have helped this herbivore see better during months of darkness each winter. Quetzalcoatlus.
Quetzalcoatlus was a gigantic flying reptile, or pterosaur. With a wingspan of more than 30 feet, it was one of the largest flying creatures that has ever lived on Earth.
This animal was about 7 kids tall. Quetzalcoatlus might have eaten a variety of animals that it found or hunted on the ground, including amphibians, reptiles, and rodent-like mammals. Quetzalcoatlus was a giant pterosaur that lived in what is now North America during the late Cretaceous time period. Raptor Rex.
Raptor Rex, a smaller cousin of Tyrannosaurus Rex, was a theropod dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. This little carnivore had powerful jaws and was probably an excellent hunter of small dinosaurs. Raptor Rex is a close cousin of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, but much smaller. Like T-Rex, it had short arms and a large head. Rabdodon.
Rabdodon is a two-legged dinosaur that lived in Europe during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Rabdodon was a plant-eater, or herbivore. Rabdodon belongs to the same group of dinosaurs as Iguanodon and the duck-billed Corythosaurus. Rhamphorhynchus. Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Rhamphorhynchus was a carnivore that ate a diet mainly of fish and insects. With its long, narrow beak and sharp teeth, it seems that Rhamphorhynchus survived by dipping its head into the lakes and rivers of late Jurassic Europe and scooping up fish, and possibly frogs and insects, much like a modern pelican. Rheolhosaurus. This animal was about 3 kids tall. Rheolhosaurus was a herbivore that ate only plants. Rheolhosaurus was a very large dinosaur for the late Triassic period. In fact, it is believed to be one of the largest animals in its home of South America during its time. Sonajay.
Sonage was a huge snake that lived in India during the Cretaceous time period. Like other snakes, Sonage probably sensed its prey by feeling vibrations from the ground and sticking out its tongue to smell the air.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Like other snakes, Sonage was a carnivore. It ate small animals, including baby dinosaurs. Sonage, like other snakes, probably sensed its prey by feeling vibrations on the ground and sticking its tongue out to smell the air. Sauroposeidon.
Sauroposeidon was a gigantic sauropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Sauroposeidon was a large, plant-eating dinosaur. Sauroposeidon was an enormous creature about 100 feet long and 50 feet tall. Like all sauropods, it had a small head, a long neck and tail, and walked on 4 thick legs. Sauronitholestes.
Sauronitholestes was a small, feathered theropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Sauronitholestes probably ate little animals like lizards, mammals, and birds. Sauronitholestes was a feathered predator, closely related to Velociraptor. Shonosaurus.
Shonosaurus was a giant marine reptile that resembled some modern-day whales. Like whales, it was an air breather, which means that it had to come up to the surface to get a breath of air.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. As one of the largest carnivores on land or sea, Shonosaurus was a slow-moving sea creature. It probably ate animals like squid and fish. Shonosaurus was a giant ichthyosaur, a kind of marine reptile that lived in the Triassic time period. Cynovenator.
Cynovenator was a chicken-sized theropod dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Cynovenator probably ate small animals like lizards, mammals, and birds. Cynovenator is a close relative of Troodon. Spinosaurus.
This giant meat-eating dinosaur lived in Africa during the Cretaceous. It had a long snout and tall spines along its back.
This animal was about 5 kids tall. Spinosaurus was a carnivore. It had a long face like a crocodile with plenty of teeth, perfect for catching fish and other animals. Spinosaurus lived in Africa during the late Cretaceous time period. Stegosaurus.
This animal had large bony plates on its back. Some paleontologists think that Stegosaurus used its plates to warm up on cold days and cool down on hot days.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Stegosaurus was a herbivore with a horny beak instead of front teeth, and a set of flat teeth in the back of its jaw that were perfect for grinding up vegetation. Although the Stegosaurus was a relatively large dinosaur, it had a small brain. In fact, it might be one of the smallest brains of all the dinosaurs that have been discovered. Stygimoloch.
This animal had a super thick skull. We're not sure what the thick bone was used for, but some scientists think that the head was used to butt the sides of other Stygimoloch.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Stygimoloch was a herbivore that walked on two legs and lived in the late Cretaceous time period of what is now North America. Stygimoloch had a super thick skull. Some scientists think that this animal used its head to bump the sides of other Stygimoloch. Styracosaurus.
With a large nose horn and several big spikes pointing backward from its bony frill, this horned dinosaur is one of the most remarkable animals that has ever lived.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Like other ceratopsians, the jaws of the Styracosaurus had a strong beak up front and plenty of slicing teeth behind, perfect for cropping and slicing plant food. Styracosaurus was a ceratopsian dinosaur. It was a giant plant eater that lived in the late Cretaceous time period in North America. Therizinosaurus.
Therizinosaurus is a large feathered dinosaur that lived in the Cretaceous. With short, stubby legs, a pot belly, and long arms with hands tipped with huge claws,
This animal was about 5 kids tall. Using their long arms and claws to reach out and cut plants, Therizinosaurus were herbivores. Some scientists also believe that their claws were used for self-defense. Therizinosaurus is a large feathered dinosaur from the Cretaceous. With short, stubby legs, pot belly, long arms, and hands tipped with huge claws, it was one of the most bizarre-looking dinosaurs. Triceratops.
this big guy had a huge beak up front and hundreds of teeth behind, perfect for chewing tough plants.
This animal was about 3 kids tall. Triceratops had a large parrot-like beak suited to slicing through vegetation like thick-branched tree limbs. It had hundreds of teeth in the rear of the jaws for cutting up lots of tough plants. Triceratops had a huge bony frill on the back of its head, which was most likely used to keep the peace in large groups by showing other animals the oldest in the herd. Troodon.
This little guy had a big brain, which probably made it one of the smartest dinosaurs around.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Unlike most dinosaurs feeding on either plants or meat, Troodon was most likely an omnivore, eating both plants and meat. Troodon was a small bipedal dinosaur with a big brain, which probably made it one of the smartest dinosaurs around. Tyrannosaurus.
With arms so tiny, this giant meat-eater probably used its head to grab its prey.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Tyrannosaurus was a bipedal carnivore and was one of the biggest predators ever to live on land. The shape and placement of the eye sockets in the Tyrannosaurus tell us that their eyes faced forward, which meant they could see far off in the distance. A big advantage for a hunter. Utahraptor.
Utahraptor was a fast-running theropod dinosaur that lived in North America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. With its long running legs and a huge claw on each foot, Utahraptor would have been an excellent predator. Utahraptor grew to over 30 feet long. Velociraptor.
Velociraptor was a small feathered dinosaur that lived during the Cretaceous. It's only been found in Asia and lived in desert habitats with sand dunes.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Velociraptor is derived from the Latin words for quick and robber. It was given this name by scientists because it was a very fast carnivore. Velociraptor was a bipedal feathered dinosaur that shared many of the same features as modern birds. It's most known for its long tail and large claws that stuck out from the back of each hind leg. Velaticotherium.
Velaticotherium was an amazing mammal that lived in Asia during the Jurassic time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Velaticotherium was probably an insectivore, which means that it ate insects. It also may have been nocturnal, or most active at night. Velaticotherium was a squirrel-sized mammal that lived in Asia during the Jurassic time period. Wanonosaurus.
Wanonosaurus was a plant-eating pachycephalosaur dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Cretaceous time period.
Let's compare it to something we know the size of, a kid like you. Wanonosaurus was a plant eater, or herbivore. Like many kinds of dinosaurs, Wanonosaurus is known from only one incomplete skeleton. To rebuild the whole skeleton, paleontologists had to look at the bones of close pachycephalosaur relatives. Xenotarsosaurus.
Xenotarsosaurus was a theropod that lived in South America during the Cretaceous time period.
This animal was about 2 kids tall. Xenotarsosaurus probably hunted small dinosaurs and other small animals. Xenotarsosaurus had 4-fingered hands and click to print a collector's card. Yangchuanosaurus.
Yangchuanosaurus was a theropod dinosaur that lived in Asia during the Jurassic time period.
This animal was about 4 kids tall. Yangchuanosaurus probably hunted plant-eating dinosaurs like Brachiosaurus. And Yangchuanosaurus was a theropod dinosaur that lived in Asia. With plenty of sharp teeth in their jaws, they would have been